The new Australian government I lead is committed to building a strong, prosperous and outward-looking Australia. Our strategic goals are to maximise global and regional stability and to ensure the global economy remains open. Through this, we believe we can enhance our economic prospects, not just for Australia, but for all nations. We approach our task as a nation that is one fully committed to global engagement. We're the 15th largest economy in the world. Our stock market is valued over $1 trillion, 3 times the size of that of Singapore, around half the size of the Hang Seng, which of course includes many mainland Chinese companies on its bourse, and responsible for more foreign listings each year than any other Asian bourse. Because of superannuation policy reforms we undertook in the 1990s, we have developed a world-class funds management industry, which now has the world's 4th largest pool of funds under management. We are a major supplier of energy and resources to the major economies of East Asia, China, Japan and the ROK. Our resources exports to India are growing and will continue to grow into the future. Our military budget is the 11th largest in the world. We have a sophisticated foreign policy establishment deeply enmeshed with the countries of Asia and the Pacific. We are a country, therefore, with both global and with regional interests. In the prosecution of these interests, our foreign policy has 3 pillars: our alliance with the United States, our membership of the United Nations, and our policy of comprehensive engagement with the countries of the Asia-Pacific region. Some might argue that these are mutually exclusive propositions. I regard them as mutually reinforcing propositions. To prosecute them, the government intends to deploy what I've described as a creative middle power diplomacy, both globally and regionally. This means, for example, that you will see Australia being more active in global efforts to meet the challenges of climate change following our ratification of the Kyoto Protocol within a week of taking office. This means we'll be doing more to work with our partners around the world to get real progress against the Millennium Development Goals, particularly among Pacific Island nations. Last month I visited Papua New Guinea and announced that Australia would seek to develop what I've called Pacific Partnerships for Development with each of the island states of the Pacific. Under these arrangements, Australia and our Pacific partners will set mutually agreed development outcomes. In return, Australia will be prepared to offer more by way of direct development assistance. The strategy is to provide better assistance targeted at real progress against measures of health, education and basic economic infrastructure. More broadly, our foreign policy intention is to prosecute a more activist foreign policy in partnership with our allies and friends and through the United Nations, the wider community of nations, in areas where we believe we can make a difference. For too long, our voice has been too quiet in the councils of the world. China started its domestic reform and global opening process 30 years ago this year, October 1978. The first steps towards economic reform were measured. There have been setbacks along the way. But the results that have been achieved over the longer term have been unmistakable. The living standards of the Chinese people have been lifted dramatically. In the process of developing itself and its people, China has made a critical contribution to global economic growth. It has become a trading power and is now becoming an investment power. China holds nearly $500 billion worth of US Treasury bonds, second only to Japan's holdings. The economic transformation of China has seen a big shift in the personal choices also available to the Chinese people. Human rights remain a real problem, as demonstrated by recent violence in Tibet. Problems that require dialogue, problems that require restraint. China's legal system is still developing. It's come a long way from the turmoil of the 1970s, but in a globalised world where intellectual property needs protection, a fully functioning, transparent and independent legal system is crucial for investor confidence. We have to recognise that China's leaders also face staggering challenges domestically. A recent Brookings research note, co-authored by my friend Jeff Bader, for the upcoming presidential election, noted the scale of the challenge. Per capita GDP in China is still only $1,600. The population is ageing, and there are big inequalities between coastal and western regions and between urban and rural areas. Air pollution is a major problem. Lack of water is a serious problem across northern China. And China has to cope with moving up to 13 million people a year into urban centres, the biggest urbanisation movement in human history. China's leaders recognise that they cannot make progress against these significant international challenges in a hostile international environment. So China's focus has instead been on stability. In this context, the single most important element of China's foreign relations is, of course, its relationship with the United States. Since the Nixon visit of 1972, the United States has been actively engaging China. On Friday, in my discussions with President Bush, I commended the administration's handling of the China relationship. The wide range of new senior dialogue mechanisms gives Washington and Beijing channels to deal with emerging challenges before they become real problems. An important development in US policy towards China was in 2005 when then Deputy Secretary of State Bob Zoellick outlined his concept of China as a responsible global stakeholder. His argument was that China has benefited from the current global international order in both economic and security terms. And as a growing power, China should be more than just a passive member of the international order. It should work actively to sustain that order that has enabled China's success. Bob Zoellick's logic is powerful. It points to the interest that China shares with other members of the international community. China's own approach is to publicly emphasise its focus on its economic development and the priority it therefore places on a stable global order. China has variously articulated this approach as one of the peaceful rise of China, the peaceful development of China, or more recently, that of a harmonious world. The idea of harmony is not new in the Chinese body politic. In the early 1900s, the Chinese thinker Kang Youwei wrote about the great unity or the great harmony and proposed a future utopian world free of political boundaries. It is worthwhile thinking through how we might try to draw these differing concepts of responsible stakeholder and a harmonious world together. The idea of a harmonious world, and this is in China's explanation of the term, depends on China being a participant in the world order and, along with others, acting in accordance with the rules of that order. Otherwise, my argument would be, harmony is impossible to achieve. Therefore, there is, in my argument, on the face of it, a natural complementarity between these two philosophical approaches, and a complementarity that could be developed further in the direction of some form of conceptual synthesis. In a political and foreign policy system as large and as complex as China's, this provides a potentially useful framework to start bringing together these two worldviews. Differences, of course, will continue, but common ground, where found, should be consolidated, developed, and if possible, built upon.